Please like and subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon to get new video updates.
It's in the air, it's everywhere, every day. Give in to a whim and fly away.
Well, in 1894, Alexander Graham Bell's patents for the telephone expired. That year, Alfred Stromberg and Stromberg-Carlson, both workers for Bell Telephone in Chicago, each invested $500 and formed the Stromberg-Carlson Company. They sold equipment primarily to independent telephone companies, especially farmers, and gained a reputation for quality, reliable equipment and stable pricing. In 1904, Stromberg-Carlson was purchased by Home Telephone. They were a large service provider in Rochester, New York, and soon relocated SC mostly to Rochester. During World War I, Stromberg-Carlson produced portable phones and camp switchboards that the Signal Corps used in Europe. Demand was so great that all domestic phone production was stopped. In 1920, Benjamin Olney joined Stromberg-Carlson and took the position of engineer in charge of the Electrical Engineering Laboratory. He is a significant figure for me in SC in the development of their high quality audio components and speakers. During his 30 years with Stromberg-Carlson, he founded the company's Acoustical Laboratory and became the director of research. Olney did significant acoustical research while at Stromberg-Carlson and held 8 patents for the inventions that contributed to acoustical engineering. These included the coaxial speaker, and you can see a drawing from one of his patents here, and the acoustical labyrinth, which was an enclosure with a folded and damped rear acoustic passage. Among other things, the labyrinth reduced cabinet resonances and improved system low frequency output beyond that of the free air resonance of the speaker. That was a major improvement for radios of the 30s. The modern version of the acoustical labyrinth is called the transmission line and used on some high-end speaker systems today. Olney filed the patent for the labyrinth in 1934. In 1923, Stromberg-Carlson started producing Nucleodyne radios, and in 1927, they were licensed to use RCA patents in their radios. Like the phones, their radios were quality products. In 1927, Stromberg-Carlson purchased WHAM from George Eastman and built it into a 50,000 watt clear channel station. In the early 30s, Stromberg-Carlson had a division called T-Lector. They would wire an entire house into an entertainment center equipped with amplifiers and closets and hidden speakers that were controlled by wired remotes for radio, phono, and volume from multiple locations, and each location could select the program source it wanted. Stromberg-Carlson would custom design each system to suit the needs of the wealthy homeowner. Prices started at $410, $1930. In 1935, the service was no longer offered, and high-end consoles were only equipped with the Acoustical Labyrinth Speaker System. Stromberg-Carlson always had good advertising, and this one by Dr. Seuss for the Labyrinth is no exception. In 1939, Stromberg-Carlson began operation of one of the first FM broadcasting stations in the United States, W8XVB, on the old 42 to 50 megahertz band. Eventually, that became WHFM. During World War II, Stromberg-Carlson produced large quantities of telephone and radio communications equipment in support of the war effort. For their efforts, Stromberg received the Excellent Awards, 4 Excellence Awards, or the E Awards. Only Kodak received more. One very secret thing Stromberg did work on was radar and radar jamming equipment. A 5-story tower had been built on the Humboldt Street side of the Carlson Road facility for radar testing. After the war, the community was told about the top secret radar work done there. After World War II, Stromberg-Carlson was part of the beginning of the television era in the US. On Humboldt Street, adjacent to the Carlson Road plant, WHAM, FM, and television had a new broadcast center. The war had delayed all of this, but according to my friend, the late Walter Dixon, who worked at WHAM, the facilities on Humboldt Street were the best between New York and Chicago. Along with new facilities on Humboldt Street, Stromberg-Carlson was incorporating new technology into their products, including amplifiers, tuners, and speakers for the emerging high fidelity era. About 1953, Stromberg-Carlson started selling its first line of matched hi-fi components called Custom 400 Wide Range High Fidelity. This line consisted of the SR 401 high fidelity AM FM tuner with 20 to 20,000 hertz range plus or minus 1.5 dB and 5 microvolts for 30 dB quieting on FM. There were 2 amplifiers, 10 watt AR 410, 10 watts from 20 to 20,000 plus or minus 1 dB with less than 1% total harmonic distortion. For that amplifier, they used 2 6F6 output tubes. And then there was the 25 watt AR 425 deluxe preamp power amp with 20 to 20,000 bandwidth plus or minus 0.5 dB with less than 1% total harmonic distortion at 20 watts. The preamp used 2 12AX7 tubes and the power amp 2 6L6 output tubes. 2 speakers were also part of this line. The RF 471 12-inch with a coaxial mounted tweeter that used a Carpincho leather for the cone edge suspension. Stromberg said that this leather smoothed high frequency response and reduced edge reflections. The frequency response was 30 to 14,000 hertz with more than 100-degree dispersion in all frequencies in every direction. The other speaker was the RF 475 15-inch coax. This speaker had a 10.5 pound Elnico 5 magnet, and it did 30 to 16,500 hertz. That was very flat response. The speakers were designed to use the RH480 exponential acoustical labyrinth. This enclosure was very efficient and produced true bass below the free air resonance of the woofer without sacrificing the naturalness of sound in the mid to high frequencies. Along with the amps and the speakers, Garrard RC480 record changers and Stromberg-Carlson 21-inch panoramic television chassis were also part of the Custom 400 system. By the mid-50s, Stromberg-Carlson expanded their audio components line as well as their home hi-fi console line. Improvements were made to some of the original Custom 400 components. The SR 401 tuner became the 402 with improved specifications and a more modern look. A new low price tuner, the 403B, was added. It could be used just as a tuner or connected to an old AM console to add FM and a phono input. It also came in a very nice mahogany cabinet. They added an acoustic lens to the tweeter on the RF471, and I think you could see it in this speaker. The tweeter is kind of shaded, but there's an acoustic lens on that. And they also changed the magnet. 4 red cone speakers were added to the hi-fi line, including the outstanding, as Stromberg said it, RF 468-inch speaker with curvilinear cone. According to the specs, the speaker in the right enclosure could do 45 to 14,000 hertz. And there was also an advanced design of a speaker identified as the RF 465 Omega M 15-inch coax. That had a response of 30 to 20,000 cycles. The speaker incorporated a tweeter design without a voice coil. Instead, it used a light aluminum, as they called it, a voice ring that was attached to the bottom of the cone in a varying magnetic field. It's my belief that this concept was incorporated into the Stromberg-Carlson RT477 induction tweeter in 1958. An integrated amp, the AR420, was added to the line. It was simply the combination of the AE426 preamp and AP428 power amp. 3 other integrated amps were added. And 2, the AR411 and AR419, had the new lower profile design achieved by putting the tubes in horizontally. 2 new AM/FM receivers, the SR406 with 32 watts and the SR407 with 15 watts, which is pictured here, were added to the line and available with handsome mahogany cabinets. They were also used in the Stromberg-Carlson mid and high priced consoles like the Pastoral and the Emperor. If all that wasn't enough for the mid-50s custom 400 line of components, Stromberg-Carlson also sold some new speaker enclosures. One, a corner unit was made just for the RF 468-inch speaker. And then there was one for that used an 8-inch and a 12-inch speaker, and one for use with an 812 or 15-inch speaker. To accompany these enclosures, 2 equipment cabinets were also offered. Another significant thing happened in the mid-50s. Stromberg-Carlson was purchased by General Dynamics in 1955. Within a year, WHAM, FM, and TV were all sold, and radio and television production ended too. Possibly a harbinger of things to come, but the stereo era was soon to arrive, and SC was ready for it. About 1958, Stromberg-Carlson started to roll out their new stereo audio amps, tuners, speakers, enclosures, 2 manual turntables, and home stereo consoles. By this time, Stromberg-Carlson not only came up with new technical specs, but the look had changed as well. Most of the electronic components were now 13.5 inches wide and 4.5 inches high. All 16 new consoles were designed to accept these components hanging from the middle of the cabinet. Even some of the Acoustical Labyrinth speaker enclosures were redesigned. so that they would fit into the console and rest on 4 acoustic isolators. You can see that in the diagram here on the left is what the isolator looked like, and approximately how it was placed in the cabinet on the right. Stromberg-Carlson was trying to isolate vibrations generated by the speakers from the components. If all that wasn't enough, the components and consoles appearance had styling by Federico. The new labyrinths were made with the consoles in mind, but you could also purchase them separately. And they had decorator housings for them as standalone units. The housing also matched the consoles. So you could have a wider stereo image or have 3 speaker stereo if you'd like. Every console had provisions for stereo choice switch that would mechanically allow you to do that. And you can see here the diagram of it was just a mechanical switch inside, and if you bought the extra speaker, you would get a housing that matched your console, and you could then have 3 or a wider 2 speaker stereo system just by connecting it and connecting the switch. Another reason for the decorator housing was because the labyrinths were made from Armstrong, a product called Temlock, and it wasn't wood. Temlock was used because it absorbed frequencies down to the 200 hertz range, and that allowed the speakers with special material that Stromberg also made that lined them to get rid of the necessary 200 hertz and higher frequencies that were in the back wave, so that the speakers labyrinths work properly to flatten and lower the response of the speaker system. This worked fine with the RF 488-inch speaker, but some of the 12-inch and 15-inch drivers had to be redesigned with what Stromberg called a soft skiver outer cone suspension. Today it's called an accordion surround, and some speakers still use it. The other thing Stromberg did to all its red cone hi-fi speakers except the 475 and the 483 was to stop using alnico magnets in favor of thinner barite magnets. This made them fit the smaller labyrinths, and Stromberg coined the term slim line styling for them. Those weren't the only Stromberg-Carlson speaker developments. For the labyrinths, a 5-inch mid-range speaker was designed, the RM 485. It was in a metal case with essentially a flat cone, very unusual for that time, that was covered with a metal lens. Another new design was the RT 477 induction tweeter. Earlier I mentioned the RF 465 Omega M 15-inch coax speaker with a tweeter that had no voice coil. The RT 477 induction tweeter was of the same design, but a standalone tweeter. Without the voice coil and wires, the cone mass was very light. To quote Stromberg-Carlson, this tweeter design incorporates an induction field to transmit signal strength to the tweeter cone, end of quote. The specs were very impressive. Response was flat from 800 to beyond 20,000 with an angle of dispersion of 140 degrees and power handling of 50 watts. This tweeter was also incorporated into their two best new Coax speakers, a 12-inch RF 487 and 15-inch RF 484. The specs of that speaker were outstanding, with a free air resonance of 20 hertz, 3-inch voice coil, IM distortion of 0.3%, and 100-watt capacity. In a Stromberg-Carlson RH 416 Labyrinth, the overall response was 15 to 20,000 cycles. And Stromberg was so proud of that speaker that they said in their brochure, quote, "For smooth, flat response over a range beyond the limits of audibility at both ends, for exceptionally wide frequency dispersion, for infinitesimal IM distortion, and for superior transient response, there is no coaxial speaker made anywhere equal to the RF 484, end of quote. This could have been advertising hype, but I don't think so, especially since they also made the RF 475 that was an outstanding top 15-inch coax. And there's another shot of it that you can see that with a tweeter fits down in pretty large stuff. And they also use that same configuration on the 12-inch. Stromberg-Carlson also brought out two tuners. One was the SR 440, a further improvement over the SR 402. The 440 was possibly the best last really good tuner they made. They also made the SR 445 that later became the 445A. This tuner had an AM radio on the left and an FM radio on the right. They could be operated independently or simultaneously to receive AM/FM stereo. In the time before multiplex FM stereo broadcast, that's how we received stereo over the air. Both tuners did have a multiplex out, but at the time, there were no FM stereo broadcasts. You could also buy the AM and FM sections in separate form with separate cabinets. Stromberg did produce a multiplex unit that you can see here, the MPX/MX 477, and it was, as the Made in Rochester website says, this may have been the only solid state audio component Stromberg-Carlson ever made. But that was their multiplex adapter. And I have a couple of those, and I did have someone look at it many years ago. And he had a special equipment and he could check multiplex unit and got it running okay, but it only had about 20 dB channel separation. But, you know, back in 1960 or so, it was FM stereo and we were pretty happy with that. Initially, 3 new stereo integrated amps, the ASR 333, 433, and 444 were offered. They had distortions with bass, treble, and volume for each channel and a master gain that controlled both channels. The 333 was similar to the 433, but without provision for a magnetic phono input. They both use the EL84 output tubes for 12 watts per channel power. That's where the similarity ended. As the 433 and 444 had mag phono inputs, NARTB equalization for connection directly to a tape head, and the SC tone balance system. Stromberg had a special tone balance system. You threw a switch and you ended up hearing a tone, sounded like 60 cycle, but you could adjust left and right channel without having to go to a record and move things around just by ear. You could essentially adjust it with that tone, which was the same for left and right. The 444, you can see a picture here, was a 30-watt per channel amp using 7027 output tubes. Both amps use 7025 tubes in the preamp. These amps, like the Labyrinths, were used in the consoles. Not long after these amps came out, Stromberg-Carlson introduced the ASR 880 amp that received a lot of really good press in the stereo magazines of the time. This amp was produced on a single chassis or as a separate pre and power amp setup. Both had the same specifications of 32 watts per channel with 0.9% total harmonic distortion and frequency response of 18 to 38,000 hertz plus or minus 0.8 dB. A noted testing lab commented, quote, "A pleasant surprise came in the measuring the power output. Each channel delivered 48 watts at 1% distortion. This is unusual in an amplifier rated at 32 watts per channel." End of quote. Of special note, an 880 amp, 445A tuner, and Stromberg-Carlson speakers were installed in the White House during the Kennedy administration by our AWA member, Ron Yapel, when he worked for Stromberg-Carlson General Dynamics. For more information about this, read Ron's article, "The President's Stereo," in the November 7, 2014 issue of Forbes. SE also made a fine new stereo preamp, the ASE 434. That went with the two new power amps, the ASP 422, that was a dual channel power amp on one chassis with 20 watts per channel. The other, the ASP 437, was a 40-watt monoblock amp using a pair of 6 40 watts, 20 to 20,000. IM distortion 0.4% at 40 watts. Stromberg-Carlson said, quote, "Striking in its performance, the AP 437 set new standards for power amplifiers," end of quote. If all that new high-end stereo components weren't enough, Stromberg-Carlson came out with their own manual turntables and tone arm. The higher priced PR 499 Perfect Tempo was belt driven, variable speed, 14 to 80 RPMs with a stroboscopic speed indicator. The PR 500 was a less expensive single speed belt driven table with two synchronous motors operating together, running at exactly 33 1/3 RPM. In High Fidelity magazine, the reviewer said, quote, "The Stromberg-Carlson PR 500 performs in a manner comparable to the most expensive turntables and arms, yet sells for much less," end of quote. SE also made some new large standalone quarter wavelength duct speaker systems that produced great performance from its new speakers. There was an MSS 491 Labyrinth for the 15-inch three-way system that produced flat response from 16 to 20,000 hertz. And then there was an MSS 492 it was a 12-inch three-way system with frequency range of 22 to 18,000. And then an RS-461 that was an 8-inch two-way system with a response of 40 to 18,000. All the crossovers used in the system were made by Stromberg-Carlson and available for individual sale. One last item from the early 1958-59 Stromberg-Carlson stereo era that I've got to mention is the complete stereo music center that they made. It was more than a console system, but did have a fine furniture cabinet that Stromberg-Carlson was noted for. Two models were made, the SP991 Contemporary and the SP993 in French provincial style. These were very large units measuring 75 inches wide, 63 inches and 80 inches high, depending on the model, and 24 inches deep. Each one had a perfect tempo turntable, Garrard RC88 4-speed changer, SR 445 AM stereo, FM stereo tuner, an ASR 434 stereo preamp, two AP 437 40-watt power amps, and two RS 424 15-inch three-way Labyrinth speaker systems and a stereo tape deck. I've never seen one of these, but I don't think other manufacturers at the time made anything even close to this. Stromberg-Carlson was very proud of the new stereo products they had produced. The Complete Music Center was Stromberg-Carlson's ultimate showcase for the advanced products they made to start their stereo era. The SC stereo products sold in the late 50s were very good, and the concept of using components for everything was unique in the industry at the time. You could purchase the least expensive SC console, the one pictured here, the SP901, and modify it in any way you wanted with Stromberg-Carlson components. Or you could buy, if you had enough money, the complete music centers and get every advanced stereo component they made. Or make your own custom complete music center with amps, tuners, turntables, speakers, and equipment cabinets. Well, for some reason, Stromberg-Carlson decided to make some changes. Carried over were some of the console cabinets, but there were some new lower designs, lower in size designs, and the total was down to 13 from 16. But they all were still styled by Federico. They still use the component concept, speaker isolation system, and carried over the 445A tuner, Garrard, and manual turntables, and the ASR 880 amplifier, but in single chassis form. The big change came in the speaker systems. From the consoles, the Labyrinths and hi-fi red cone speakers were gone, although they still were produced for sale. In their place was a ducted port 8-inch two-way RS 501 high compliance speaker system and two sealed enclosure high compliance systems, the RS 504 12-inch two-way and the RS 506 12-inch three-way system. Stromberg-Carlson designed special speakers for these systems. The 8-inch speaker in the RS 501 was similar to the red cone RF 480, except the cone was made of heavier material and, according to Stromberg-Carlson, of, quote, long excursion design, end of quote. The tweeter, which was used in all three systems, was now elliptical, about 2.5 inches by 3.5 inches, with a silver-plated voice coil. There was a two-position tweeter level switch, and the system needed 12 watts for its proper operation. The RS-504 12-inch two-way system had a 12-inch of long excursion design again, and used an accordion surround for the outer edge of the cone and a large spider suspension at the voice coil. The system had a 3-position tweeter level switch and needed 12 watts for a minimum of 12 watts for proper operation. The 3-way RS-506 system used a similar 12-inch woofer, but the cone was heavier constructed. The elliptical 6x9 mid-range crossed over at 800 hertz with the woofer and 3,500 hertz with the elliptical tweeter. A 3-position mid-range and a 3-position tweeter level switch was provided, and the system needed an amp of 12 watts or more. Like the Labyrinth system, separate units could be purchased and used with decorator housings for 3-channel stereo or for standalone component systems. The new speaker systems were actually a little larger than the ones they replaced, and they were made of the same material. The big difference was that they were just boxes, and so much easier to construct. The speakers were less expensive to build too. So in general, Stromberg-Carlson had to be able to save money and time and materials needed to build these speaker systems. I've never done an A/B comparison of those speakers with the small Labyrinth systems they replaced in the consoles. I've heard them and they sound okay and were at least as good and generally better than their competition at the time. Another major change came with the introduction of 2 new amplifiers. I can understand replacing the ASR 444 with the 880, but not sure why SC replaced the ASR 333 and 433 as they were good amps. The new amps were the 12-watt per channel ASR 220 made in 3 versions, and the 18-watt ASR 660. As I said, the ASR 220 came in 3 versions, A, B, and C. The A version was basic with no mag phono section. It had gang bass and treble and clutch type volume control. The B was similar, but with a rumble and scratch filter and stereo reverse switch. These amps were used in the consoles, and I'm surprised they actually made and used the A version, as the B version has the minimum useful controls. These amps were used in consoles with the 8-inch speaker system. The C version had a mag phono section, separate clutch type bass, treble, and volume controls along with the filters. This version was never used in the consoles, but was sold as Stromberg's new low power and low price stereo amp. The ASR 660 was used in the 3 mid-price consoles that used the 2-way 12-inch speaker systems. And they also used the SR 445A AM/FM tuner and Garrard RC88 record changer with a Shure M7D cartridge. This amp had a mag phono section, separate clutch type bass, treble, volume controls, and a master gain along with all the necessary filters. This was a good amp with more power and better specs than the ASR 433 and was sold as a standalone Stromberg-Carlson component. This was the last, the ASR 880 was unchanged amp that we had seen earlier, but only used in the two top consoles. These consoles also use the three-way 12-inch speaker system, the 445A tuner, and the Gerard RC88 changer with the Shure cartridge. This was the last component-based console series that Stromberg-Carlson made. SC continued to make consoles, and here we see the Penthouse series from about 1962. And that's where large made, these were large cabinets and very heavy construction. The last consoles that I know of were called the Young America series. These were smaller than the previous stereo consoles and were less expensive. Possibly they represented a shift in what the consumer wanted and the space that was available for something that played music without the audiophile specs, but sounded okay. They did look nice and still had, quote, styled by Federico, fine cabinets, a Stromberg-Carlson tradition. The Penthouse and Young America series didn't use components, but used a new amp, the ASR 110 single 7408 output tube per channel, or the ASR 120 with two 7408s per channel. The 110 and 120 both used less expensive output transformers than the SE component amps and had relatively high distortion by comparison. The 110 produced 5 watts per channel and the 120 10 watts per channel. And the 120 had 1% total harmonic distortion at 1,000 hertz from 70, and the frequency range was only 70 to 20,000 range. The previous 220 series that I mentioned earlier, component amps used the same 7408 output tubes, but with much better transformers and had 12 watts per channel with 0.7 total harmonic distortion, and their frequency response range was 20 to 20,000 plus or minus 0.5 dB. Some consoles also use this radio, which is the SR 130 AM/FM tuner. This tuner didn't have the specs of the previous audiophile tuners, but like the SR 445A, the AM and FM sections could be operated independently or simultaneously for AM/FM stereo. There was provision for multiplex out for use with the Stromberg-Carlson multiplex adapter. Both the Penthouse and Young America series used less expensive speakers connected to baffles that were part of the cabinet structure. Gone was the acoustical isolation system of the past consoles. I believe the heart of the speaker system was a 6x9 speaker that Stromberg-Carlson had on the line for many years. It was primarily developed to go with car AM radios they made. A good sounding speaker with good response, but nowhere near the quality of the Redcone RF 480. Some of the Young America series consoles had one 6x9 and one tweeter per channel, while others added a down-firing, inexpensive 12-inch speaker that was used in the mid-50s, hi-fi consoles. The larger Penthouse series generally had a 3-way system and a 4-way system with a down-firing 15-inch speaker, 2 6x9s, and 2 oval tweeters per channel. Given how inexpensive these speakers were as compared to the Redcone units, the Penthouse and Young America consoles sounded as good as the competition, and the ones with the down-firing woofers produced some very good effective bass response. Stromberg-Carlson did continue to make most of their high-end stereo components while they made these non-audiophile consoles. But by the mid-60s, stereo component and console production came to an end. My dad still worked for Stromberg-Carlson, and I can remember going to a large room in a building on University Avenue, not far from the Carlson Road plant, where there were boxes of components, electronics, and speaker systems for less than wholesale prices. We paid $86 for our ASR 880 amp. The base ASR 420A amp was $25. The 220B, $30, and the ASR 660, $60. The SR 445A AM FM tuner was $70, and the PR 500 manual single speed turntable with arm that got such high ratings you could buy for $30. The RS 501 8-inch two-way speaker system sold for $25, and the wood decorator housing for $5. The larger 504 12-inch two-way system sold for $40, and the housing for $8. And the RS 506 three-way system sold for $50, and its decorator housing for $12. Many Stromberg and non-Stromberg employees took advantage of this sale and were happy to get SC component stereo system at less than wholesale prices. For me, it was sort of a bittersweet moment. Happy to get the 880 at less than half the retail price, but also knowing that this was the end of over 70 years of high quality audio products from Stromberg-Carlson. It was another part of Made in Rochester that was no more, and another product line that could no longer carry on the tradition of there's nothing finer than a Stromberg-Carlson. Thank you.
Please like and subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon to get new video updates.